finished installing this array. Before we got it energized and this property got inhabited, figured we'd go over some of the key aspects from start to finish of solar array power production. Go down through all the way from the DC production up here on the roof down to the AC feed into the grid at the box. We'll go over some of the hardware and the electrical design, help maybe give you a grasp of just what a roof mount entails as opposed to your typical ground mount, and maybe give you a good visual reference on what to expect with your own roof mount array should you choose to purchase one in the future. So we'll start off by pulling off one of these panels. Here I've got one of my impact guns and got a couple of screwdrivers and other miscellaneous tools. To begin, all solar panels are kind of fastened down with various clamps. Different manufacturers have different variations. But in general, you typically have two types. You've got clamps in the middle of your panels that we just refer to as mid clamps, and then you've got these ones on the ends, which are just end clamps. Pretty self-explanatory. Alright, so as you can see here, we've got a bunch of different hardware underneath these panels. We've got these rails that they rest on, which run horizontally across the roof. And this is just a basic deep channel unistrut that's used across multiple disciplines in the industry. Fastening this rail to the roof, we've got these roof attachments here. And roof attachments are probably one of the more widely varied pieces of hardware in the solar industry. There's a lot of different attachment and racking solutions out there. But here we like to keep it pretty simple at Alt-E. And what we have is a attachable track which has got a bolt that goes right into the rail here. And this track is resting on top of what's called a flashing, which is essentially just a piece of metal which acts to help shed water from over the top of where these lag bolts have been screwed into the truss, which is holding the whole thing down. And you know, to add to watertight seals, we add a little bit of roof tar under there too. But in general, that's all a roof attachment is something that goes into your truss and helps keep your racking solution fastened to the rooftop. Alright, so moving on to the electrical side of things, you'll see we have a bunch of different wires underneath this panel. Right over here, this bare copper 6 gauge is what some of you may have already identified as our equipment ground. And what this serves to do is electrically ground all the rails up here, and by extension the panels themselves, so that in case there's something like a lightning strike, all that extra energy has some place to go to get off the roof so it doesn't damage all this expensive equipment up here. Moving on to the power production side, we've got these leads coming straight out of the back of your panel, and these wires carry DC down into this piece of hardware, which is called a microinverter, which converts all the DC here into AC, which gets sent through this trunk cable and then back into the house. So I went ahead and removed the cover on this junction box here to show you what happens to our trunk cable on its way into the house. So up here is where we saw the trunk cable last, and it runs underneath these two panels down beneath this rail and wraps into this piece of liquid-tight that runs horizontally across the roof, back into this junction box here, where it's spliced with wire nuts to some Romex cable, the orange stuff right in here. And that cable shoots down through a hole in the bottom of this junction box, which we call a roof penetration. It shoots down through that and straight into your attic. And then from there, it goes through the attic and back to your main breaker panel. All Alright, so after following those wires through the attic and the house, we wind up down here at the AC combiner box. Now, there's different kinds of AC combiners out there. What we've got here is a proprietary model offered by Enphase. Since the microinverters I showed you earlier are also by Enphase, they tend to like to keep their hardware synchronized. But most AC combiners are fairly basic in that all they contain is a bus of some kind where the leads from your rooftop come in, and they're combined onto this bus through means of breakers or sometimes fuses. It kind of depends on your overcurrent protection means. But this Enphase model is a little more complex in that it has some power monitoring hardware installed in it as well. We've got this Envoy up here, which connects to your house's Wi-Fi and allows you to access it to monitor your array's power production. And it's also got this, what's referred to as a CT down here, which just wraps around those wires and measures the current output. So yeah, it seems a little intimidating on the surface, but most of these AC combiners you come across are fairly simple in concept. So after all our circuits were combined into one over at the AC combiner box, that last combined circuit finds its way out here to the last stage of our PV system, which is the utility tie-ins. Now there's several different components here that we'll go over, the first of which is this, the AC disconnect. Now the purpose of this is to have a spot where you can easily shut off AC power going up to the inverters on the roof, because those inverters need to sense grid power in order for them to convert the DC generated by the panels into AC. Now you might be able to do this over at the AC combiner box by flipping all those breakers we saw earlier, but this is enforced by the NEC now to create rapid shutdown, which is just another way of saying that you can easily shut off the system from one point. So if firefighters need to quickly de-energize the entire household, they can do so easily from just this section of the building, either from the main breaker panel there or this AC disconnect here. Next to the AC disconnect, we've got the production meter, which hasn't exactly been installed yet, and it would look pretty similar to this net meter over here. Really, the only purpose it serves is to kind of double check the numbers of power production that your array is generating, although the net meter kind of accomplishes that too, and we'll go over that in a second. But before we hit the net meter, that power from the production meter is going to come into the main breaker panel over here, where we've got this PV backfeed breaker right down here, and this is kind of the final gateway before we get to the grid, and another way of just making sure that power from the array is sort of isolated from the grid, so in case the grid goes down and there's linemen working up on lines, that there's not extra power from the array going back in, although there's multiple measures to prevent that, like we discussed earlier with the AC disconnect. So there's multiple phases of safety leading up to the grid before all that. And then finally, the net meter, and this just keeps track of all the power your array is producing and how much power the house itself is consuming, and will be the final numbers you see on your utility bill at the end of the month, showing how much you've produced for them or how much you've consumed, vice versa. So that concludes our general overview of what you can expect from your typical roof mount array. Although you may have noticed that a lot of the hardware is interchangeable based on the preference your installer has for specific manufacturers or specific design strategies. All that can have a fairly considerable impact on the total cost of the array, its function, and even the amount of time it takes to install. We'll go into more detail about how those things work and sort of weigh the pros and cons of each strategy in future videos. But for now, we thought we'd sort of provide you with a point of reference and a bit of a visual aid for what to expect on your typical roof mount in general. So be sure to check back again in the future, and have a good one.